So the recording has started, and I'm going to turn it over to Amanda.
I guess I need to unmute myself. Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well. We have beautiful weather here in Harrisburg. I hope you also have lovely weather as well. There we go. So I have some updates for you, and then Chuck Klinger will be talking to you about the DRAW project. And how agencies can apply for it. Christine will be providing some information about professional development to address some questions that people have had and some provide some clarification on some confusion that we think has come up around professional development. And then I believe Mary, I'm not sure, either Mary or Christine will talk to you about the upcoming webinars. The next couple of months are what the topics of our monthly webinars will be, and solicit some participants. So 2023-24 grants. Just wanted to provide a reminder to everyone about what the different status meant for you and your grants. So if you go into eGrants and the, I believe it's the workflow step, says either ABLE final review, ABLE review complete, or AFLA review complete. Different grants have different names for that final workflow step. But if your grant is in one of those workflow steps, it means that the grant has gone through the entire approval process, including the comptrollers, and has been approved for payment. If your grant was in that step by the end of August, I believe you should be getting a payment in September. If you are wondering whether or not you will get a payment, you need to go into FAI and you will see whether payment information. That is not something that the advisors or I can check for you. So if you have a grant that is an ABLE final review, ABLE review complete, or AFLA review complete, and you want to know if you should be expecting money, please check FAI. Comptrollers processes kind of the automatic FAI payments at the very beginning of the month for that month. And so if your grant was not in final review status by kind of the end of August, your first payment likely will not be coming until October. If the workflow step is comptroller received for review, it is out of our hands. That means we in the division have completed our review. We have approved everything. We think it's good to go, and it has gotten to the comptroller's office, and it has to wait with them while they process it. There are a lot of grants that are currently in comptroller received for review status. I have emailed comptrollers twice asking them to process them, and have heard back, we'll do the best we can, but we have a lot going on right now. So if your grant is in comptroller received for review, there's nothing we can do about it. Please don't call your advisor. Please don't email me. It is what it is. It's with comptrollers, and they will get to it when they get to it. And if your grant is in return for correction status, you should be working on making those corrections as soon as possible, and working with your advisor to get the corrections made. Make sure you contact your advisor to review it, and wait until you get their okay before resubmitting. Because if you resubmit it and you haven't addressed all the issues, or you create additional issues, we will just have to return it to you again. So 2023-24 eData. eData opened on August 15th. Thank you to several agencies whose grants were submitted correctly. So we were able to process them immediately through the eData accepted step. So we were able to get things tested. Thank you to Michael and Steve and the eData team, especially Ben Cook, who got all of the changes made and tested in a timely fashion so that we were able to open it on our target date of August 15th, which I think might be the earliest in I don't know how long. As a reminder, please review the quick start guide that the MIS eData tech support team creates every year on the best ways to go about entering data at the beginning of the year and the order in which to enter them, and any new information regarding eData. So the process that pulls information from eGrants into eData, which then allows you, your particular agency, to enter data associated with that grant. And that happens once the grant is past the eData accepted step. So the Bureau, the division's review process goes from, the advisor looks at it, our fiscal person looks at it, it comes to me. Once I approve it, the next step after division chief review is eData accepted. And once it is past eData accepted, which I complete, the next Saturday, the process happens so that it pulls the information into eGrants. So there were a couple of grants, for example, that I approved this week, and they're past eData accepted, but they will not be in eData until next Monday to begin entering data because the process happens over the weekend. But what that does mean is that everyone whose grants were past eData accepted by the end of last week currently has access at least for that grant. What it also means, when you consider that our data policy requires you to enter data within 14 days of collection, means that all grants that were eData accepted by September 2nd should have data in eData. Now, I recognize that at the beginning of the year, there's a lot of data to enter into eData, and so you won't necessarily have all of the data up to the current date entered within, 14 days, but you should have some data in there. And there are agencies whose grants were eData accepted prior to September 2nd who have no data in the system. So if you happen to be one of those, we have noted that, and you should start making sure you're getting data entered. On the other hand, we do have lots of data already entered. These numbers on the slide actually were numbers that I found last week, looking at exports before the template was even open. At that point, we'd already had 2,700. We had more than 2,700 adults entered, more than 3,300 assessments, 300 plus classes with, almost 2,500 students assigned to them, and 270 plus groups and pairs with, over 450 students assigned to them. So thank you for those agencies. And I'm going to list a bunch of agencies by name and say thank you very much for having jumped in as soon as you had available access to eData. These agencies all have classes, staff, adults, and adult ed attendance as of looking at the access template yesterday evening around 6. That's Adult Lit Lawrence County, Altoona Area School District, Erin IU 28, Butler County Community College, Central Susquehanna Intermediate Unit 16, Community Action Inc., District 1199C, Goodwill of the Southwestern Pennsylvania, Intermediate Unit 1, Keystone Opportunity Center, Lancaster Lebanon IU 13, Lehigh Carbon Community College, Literacy Council of Lancaster Lebanon, Literacy Pittsburgh, Luzerne County Community College, New World Association, Northampton Community College, Penn State, Project of Easton, Schuylkill IU 29, Seneca Highlands IU 9, Somerset County Technology Center, and Tuscarora IU 11. And there are also several other agencies that have begun entering class staff and adults. So thank you all very much for getting that data in so quickly. We do appreciate it. 22-23 FERs. The advisors and Lori, our fiscal person, are the primary reviewers. They will be returning FERs to you if they find errors in them. You need to respond to those quickly and get them resubmitted. As with the grants, if your advisor, you need to check with your advisor to make sure everything is okay. For those of you who owe us money or owe PDE money, owe the Commonwealth money, do not send a check until we inform you that your FER has been approved. Because it's possible that you have made some errors, or we will disallow some expenditures, and in which case the amount that you send us will have to change. So don't send a check until we say, yes, your FER has been approved, please send a check. Once the FERs get to me, which means they should be in good shape and I can approve them, the order of priority will be first, agencies who are owed funds by PDE. In other words, your expenditures were greater than the amount that you had already received to date. I will be prioritizing those so we can get the funds out as quickly as possible. The next category will be those who owe funds to PDE so that we can contact you and you can get those funds to us. And then the last ones that I will handle will be the one where we're even. You expended the funds that you received and we don't owe you money and you don't owe us money. So I just wanted to let you know if you have one, say in your federal 064, you expended all the funds. And so it's, it's basically zero balance. But on your state, you are owed some funds and you're like, wait a second, she processed the state one, but she hasn't processed the federal one. That would be why. It's so that we can get funds out to agencies who we owe money to first. We can get squared away for those of you that owe us funds. And then at the end, those where we're all good, we just get them approved. I did want to point out to you that based on the original submission of the final expenditure reports, not necessarily ones that have been approved, but just as you submitted them, you expended $1,685,000 less than we awarded you, which works out to being about 5.5% of the grant amount. Now, some of you expended all of your funds, and obviously some of you are returning a greater percentage. We got an increase in our line item for 23-24 in our state line item. And we are considering the options for how those funds will go out to programs. But I do want to point out that if you're returning 5% of your grant funds to us, it is hard to argue to the powers that be who give us money that we need more money. So as I say every year, please, over the course of the year, look at your budgets, track what your expenditures are. If it looks like you're going to be under expended in certain areas, consider how you can use those funds to increase services in other areas, provide additional professional development or prep time for teachers in your programs, Send your staff to the PACE conference. Give them more time for professional development. If you are not already purchasing textbooks and giving to them to your students to keep, then do that. But, keep track of your funds over the course of the year and adjust your budgets as you're going through. If, as you get towards the end of the year, you realize that the funds that you've shifted would result in, more than 10% funds being shifted, communicate with your advisor about what you're doing with the funds, and they'll let you know if you can keep shifting or not. But, we really need you to stop returning as much money as you're returning, because it really is hard to argue that we need more money when you're not expending what we give you. And finally, I just was notified yesterday about Diploma Sender. They have once again had to suspend the import of HiSET information from PSI until an issue is resolved. There's something where tests that have been scheduled for the future, tests are coming in with those future test dates. And so credentials, transcripts were being issued that showed a person having taken a test in the future, which was obviously raising questions for the individuals who were getting those transcripts. And so Diploma Sender is working with PSI to resolve that issue. They are hoping to have it resolved sometime next week, but I did want to let you know that beginning this week, there is that suspension of import from HiSET. So if you have students who are taking the test, they will not show up in Diploma Sender yet. And these are just a couple reminders. There is not a penalty for exceeding enrollment. We removed the wording from the guidelines around not over enrolling. So you can exceed enrollment, that's fine. But we don't want student churn, right? We don't want students who just come in and leave. And, so it's wonderful if you're exceeding enrollment because you have great need and people are coming into your program and moving on and you're bringing in additional people. But if there's just a lot of turnover, and, we understand that there are legitimate reasons for why some students only come in for shorter periods of time, right? Some of you have very short managed enrollment fast track classes that are, scheduled for 15, 20, 25 hours. I know that a lot of refugees and asylees who are coming in start attending classes and then they end up moving somewhere else or they get a job and things change. So we understand that there are those challenges. But I would just encourage you to look at your data throughout the year and kind of, if you are having a lot of people coming in and just staying for a short period of time, working to figure out what the reason is for that, and seeing if there's a way that you can encourage those people to stay longer, and things like that. But there is no penalty for exceeding enrollment. As a reminder, you cannot refuse to serve people just because you think that they will not get outcomes. We have heard of programs saying that they won't bring in certain people because they're not going to stay long enough to get an EFL gain. You can't do that. We're still getting questions about 16 and 17-year-olds. So the reality is that Pennsylvania's compulsory school age is 18. Residents in Pennsylvania are expected to be enrolled in some kind of schooling until they are 18. There are very few exceptions to that. There is a page on the PDE website. Let's see if I can get this to work. called compulsory school attendance. And they give, what are the compulsory attendance requirements along with the general requirements. They provide some exceptions, which include, they're expected to be in a public school unless they're in a private school. And there are a couple other exceptions. I have been asking kind of our legal office as questions come in around, like judges saying that a kid has to do a GED program. They were surprised to hear that. Really, the kids are supposed to be in school. I also had a conversation with the Deputy Secretary of the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education, and she indicated that with some recent changes to the laws in the last 5 years or so, there really are a lot of options to help students meet graduation requirements through a variety of different paths. I hope to have someone from her office join a webinar so that they can talk about what those paths are. So that maybe we can figure out ways that programs, instead of trying to serve 16-year and 17-year-olds in our programs, can help them reconnect with the school district, and the school district can support them through one of these alternate paths towards graduation, instead of having them come to our programs and try and pass a high school equivalency test. And finally, if you do have youth 18 through 24 who are, allowed to be enrolled in our programs, they're still youth, and we really would like to see more of them co-enrolled in Title I youth activities. In 21-22, only about 6% of students in our programs who were 16 to 24 were co-enrolled in Title I youth programs, and we would really like to see those numbers increase. I understand that, locally you have to work things out with your Title I youth providers. It's not, it's not always a one-to-one fit, but I'd like to see some improvement in that area. And that is it for me.
So before we move on to Chuck talking about digital resilience in the American workforce, do we have any questions for Amanda on anything she just said? Feel free to unmute or raise your hand.
I have a question.
Sure, go ahead, Mercedes.
We had a case this year where we had, as you know, we are right next to New Jersey. And we had a young person who was still 17 who came to us to enroll in a GED program. And we are not quite sure. We thought that perhaps if this young person was in a federally funded program, not a state funded class, but a federally funded class, that it would be okay to accept him in the class. Am I correct, or
so there's a couple there are a couple nuances there, right? So the federal laws eligibility requirements are 16 and not enrolled in secondary school or required to be enrolled by state law.
Right.
So in Pennsylvania, 16 and 17-year-olds are required by state law to be enrolled in school. The individual you're referring to is from New Jersey. I do not know what New Jersey's compulsory school laws are. So if that individual was not required by New Jersey law to be enrolled in school, then yes, you would be able to serve them with federal funds, yes.
Okay.
But you know,
But-
it's not just, yes, they're 16, so yes, you can serve them with federal funds. There's several kind of ifs involved in that, but yeah.
Right. So we have to talk to New Jersey about it, I guess.
Yeah, I would assume there's probably something on their website, you know, you could probably Google what the compulsory school age is in New Jersey.
Okay.
Yeah.
All
But
right.
yes,
Thank-
you would want to find out what the requirement is, where that individual lives, yes.
Okay. Thanks so much.
And I dropped the link in the chat to the page that Amanda had demonstrated to all of you with the information about compulsory school age in Pennsylvania. So that link is in the chat. All right, well, if we don't have any other questions, we're going to turn the floor over to Chuck Klinger.
Okay, thanks, Christine. I just wanted to introduce a fairly intense professional development opportunity related to digital literacy that'll be available starting in late January, early February, called DRAW. And DRAW stands for Digital Resilience in the American Workforce. And last spring, Pennsylvania was one of three states that participated in a pilot for like a federal offering of this training or national offering of this training. And we're very excited that now we're going to offer it in our state. So you can see the goals of the course or the training include how to integrate high quality resources into instruction. And that might involve like digital resources being those resources, or it might be using technology as ways to integrate some of those high quality resources. Also learn how to develop technology rich lesson plans that integrate digital literacy skills instruction. So, you know, ways that you can get digital literacy into your academic classes. And then finally, work with an instructional coach to implement new tools and resources within instruction. So those are kind of the things that are the goals for this upcoming course. So next slide, please. Okay, thanks. So the timeline for this is going to be we're going to have applications because we will have coaches available to support participants. We need to limit participation. So we thought that instead of doing first come first served, we want to do applications. This is one of those activities where you'll participate as an agency. And what we would ask is that you have one person who would be the agency lead, and then anywhere from 2 to 10 instructors or staff participate. So we, so we'll have agencies apply and ask some questions, and there's not any requirements aside from having the lead and 2 to 10 participants, but we are going to ask some questions. If we have to choose agencies to participate, then how you respond will help us to inform maybe who we'd want to prioritize. So there will be an application, and that will be available sometime in early October. We'll give you until November to work on them. It shouldn't take too long to fill out the applications, but like I said, it's just something that will help us to decide if there's a lot of interest in this. So then once it kicks off, we're hoping to kick off in late January. There will be a kickoff event that all people will participate in. We expect it to be about 6 hours total. It will be blended, meaning there will be some preliminary work to do. Instead of us doing a lot of talking during the kickoff, a lot of that will be things that you'll preview before the kickoff, and then the kickoff will be spent preparing people for participation. So it'll be much more interactive. We are going to do the kickoff remotely. We plan to do the whole thing remotely, so people don't have to worry about, you don't have to budget for travel. So that's hopefully a plus for people. Then from the kickoff into April of 2024 will be the coursework. There will be asynchronous work, which will be learning modules, planning, teachers implementing things that they're learning and experiencing. We expect that to be about 6 hours. That's That's what we got from the people who put on the pilot that we participated in. And then there will be synchronous, there will be monthly learning circles. So that'll be 3 months. Each one will probably last about an hour. So we expect about 3 hours per participant for that. One thing that we'll do is the coaches who are assigned to each agency will do classroom observations. So you figure probably about an hour of prep type work per participant for the classroom observations. And then about an hour for a debrief. So figure on about 2 hours. And then there will be a 2 to 3 hour remote wrap up event in May where we'll tie up loose ends, talk about, where you go from here and things like that. So that's kind of the timeline for how this is going to work. And next slide, please. And the resources that will be available, each agency will have 2 coaches. One will be one of the pilot participants and another will be one of our staff. So there will be 2 people working with each agency. Part of that is we probably want to limit each coach pair to work with about 10 participants. So that's kind of our capacity, and that way we can accommodate them doing the observations. There's also access to a digital skills library, and also, something that I thought was interesting as we did the pilot, a digital skills glossary, which is a very student-friendly tool. Also, the idea of ed tech routines. So one of the things that's really promoted through this training is the idea of using routines as a way to improve your students and in some cases your teachers' digital literacy skills. And then samples of ed tech routines. And then there are 5 learning modules, defining digital skills, instructional models, practices, and resources, building the digital resilience of diverse learners, focus on equity. Well, hopefully you can read these, but I'll read them anyway, I guess. Focus on equity as a key to digital resilience and assessing digital skills. What we'll expect for completion is for each of the participants, including the agency lead, to complete at least 3 of the modules. So we figure about 2 hours per module. That's where the 6 hours of module work comes in. You will have access to all of them. So if any individual wants to work on all 5, they're certainly welcome to. But the expectation will be each individual does 3. And as an agency, you should have at least one person do each of these. So that way, within your agency, you'll have gotten through all of the modules. Before I wrap up or see if there are any questions, I did want to share a couple of the comments from our pilot teachers. We had 4 teachers participate. And this is what got me very excited about this. I thought that the comments by the teachers and the enthusiasm by the teachers at the end was really encouraging. One commented that their students were excited about what they were doing, which made the teacher even more excited. Which I thought, how much better of a comment can you have than that? Teachers commented that they were much more intentional with what and how to present in class, both in terms of academic skills and also in terms of digital literacy skills. Helped teachers to conceptualize ways digital skills fit in their role as an instructor. Another one commented how it motivates learners to persist using technology to help them learn. So, and there are many other comments. We actually have videos of the teachers recording the impact that the professional development had on them. So we'll be happy to make those available to anybody who's interested. So that is what we're looking to do in a nutshell. I'll be happy to answer any questions anybody has at this point. Like I said, we'll be sending out applications, and we'll send those probably through email to the administrators and digital literacy specialists. And also it should be available through the communication from the professional development system.
Thanks, Chuck. One thing, Chuck, and I'm going to sort of raise a question here because I think it's probably something that people are thinking about. This, my understanding from attending part of this training with you was that it's not necessarily about people having to write completely new lesson plans all the time, right?
Correct.
But about taking what they have already and sort of infusing. Is that a correct assumption?
Yes. Yeah, I think that's a really good insight. So yeah, so it's not going to be writing completely different lesson plans. And that's the whole idea of trying to use ed tech routines is you'll have strategies that teachers will develop strategies that they can incorporate into existing lessons. Different ways to collect information, different ways to get information to students, different ways for students to communicate with each other using technology.
Thanks.
Sure. Oh, and one other thing, if you are not sure about participating in this as an agency, there is another course, a national course that we're looking to offer probably more in the spring called, it's unfortunately called BEST, which I think is confusing with the assessment, but it's Building an Ed Tech Strategy Toolkit. And that's not so much as around the routines, but just thinking about the different digital tools that you can use in your classroom. And that will be more of an individual shorter term course. So that's something that we'll be promoting soon. I'm actually participating in an offering of it in California right now. So we're looking to replicate that probably in April.
We had a question in the chat that, this could count towards the 2% PD requirement, and the answer is yes to that. And I'm going to actually start talking about that in just a minute, but I'm going to leave space for if anyone has any other questions for Chuck before we move on. Okay. Next slide, Amanda, please. So I was reading through the responses to the kickoff evaluations, and there were several questions sort of asking for more information regarding ways to meet the 2% PD requirement. So the question I got was, what options do we have that will count towards the 2% of the PD opportunities for teaching staff in particular? But I think, this applies to all staff. So, first, I think when we talk about the 2% PD time, we need to talk about that it's not Act 48 time, right? Act 48 is something separate that we do, to assist people who have a requirement for continuing education to keep their certification. So that's kind of a separate issue. What we're talking about here is just the 2% PD time requirement that you all have from the guidelines and in your grants. So obviously, one way would be courses, right? All the courses that are in the PD portal. A note there. So we say maybe a course is 12 hours, right? But if it takes someone 15 to complete it, they can claim that 15 towards the 2%, and you can pay them and should pay them for the 15 hours towards the 2%, right? They just can't get the 15 hours for Act 48. But PD is about actual time spent on activities. Those estimates that we have for time are a guide for your planning purposes, right? But as we know, it takes some people longer, depending on, people start in different places, people work at different pace. So, if your staff member says, this course is listed for 12 hours, but it took me 15 and I'm putting 15 on my timesheet, then it's 15. And you should, count that and pay them for that. Another way to meet the 2% is participation in professional learning communities, the PLCs. Another way would be other courses that might apply to their job. For example, if you have a teacher who's currently working on a master's degree in education, they're probably taking coursework on, curriculum development or, sociolinguistics, whatever that they would be applying in their daily job. So that's job embedded professional development. Conferences and one-off webinars, while valuable resources, do not count as PD. However, you may use division funds to pay for conference attendance, and you should. You know, it's a great networking experience. There's great information exchanged at those conferences. So it's not that you shouldn't send your staff to PACE or to COABE or wherever. It's just that it doesn't count as part of the 2% PD time. And you know, the final point on this is all about local tracking, right? It's up to you to track the PD time. It's more than just what's in the portal. So I think that might have been a confusion a little bit, was that, you know, people were saying, oh, you know, we only have this much time in the portal, you know, we only have certificates for these classes. But you can locally track participation in professional learning communities and, you know, other things that your teachers and staff members are participating in. And then maybe just to give a couple examples, because I was thinking about why I hear about this so much, and, you know, why maybe it's difficult. So I wanted to, you know, kind of wrap my head around the numbers. So you have a full-time teacher who's working 40 hours a week. That comes out to 2080 hours a year. So that's 40 hours of PD that they should be doing, give or take. So if one course is 12 hours and they join their PLC twice a month, you know, for 2 hours a month for maybe 10 months of the year, that's 40 hours. They're over the 40 hours. So just by taking one course and participating in a PLC. And then for your part-time teachers, you know, say you have a teacher that's that's working 500 hours. They, you know, they have 10 hours of PD. That's one course, or that's participation in the PLC 1 hour every month. So I think maybe think out of the box a little bit, and think about how you're going to locally track. And then you can always go to your advisor if you have questions. One final point, and I think Amanda's going to take the next slide and talk a little bit about it, but if you have staff who have multiple roles, the professional development doesn't have to match up exactly to their roles proportionally. So if you have somebody who's an instructor and a student support coordinator, their PD can focus on what they need the most. It doesn't have to be proportional to those two jobs. So I'm going to turn it over to Amanda for a minute now, and then she's going to turn it back to me.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Christine, for a lot of that clarification and for the good segue, because that is true. Like, one, I had noticed as we were reviewing, as I've been reviewing grants, that we needed to provide a little bit more clarification around who does the 2% apply to, and, you know, how do they do the professional development. So there is a difference. So we have said, you know, data entry people who only do data entry don't have to do PD, right? I mean, they obviously have to be trained in how to do e-data, and it's good for them to refresh that, but they don't have to come up with some other kind of PD to have 2%. But as I was looking, as we were reviewing grants, there are a lot of programs, or a decent number of programs, who have teachers doing data entry, or they have a case manager who also does data entry. So in that case, you're still looking at the total hours that person is employed in your program. So, you know, if you have a full-time teacher who works 20, 40 hours and they get paid 50 hours a year to do data entry, like an hour a week to enter data for their own classes, they still have to do, it's still the 40 hours. You don't get to say, oh, okay, well, I'm going to take 1 hour off because, you know, 50 of their hours are professional development, are data entry, right? The person is a teacher, and that's what their professional development is on. The same for a case manager. I mean, if you have a case manager who's also doing some student recruitment, or you have teachers who are doing student recruitment, the time that the people spend doing data entry or student recruitment, you can't take off and say, oh, well, I'm not going to do PD time for that. No, right? So, but if you have a staff member who's, say, a staff member of your overall agency, and they happen to do 100 hours of student recruitment to support your program, but that's all they do for your program, we're not going to require them to do professional development. Now, that said, it's probably a good idea for them to have a good sense of what adult education is and what your program does, so that when they're out there doing student recruitment, they can talk to people about your programs. But we're not going to make them do, if they're 100 hours, we're not going to make them do 0.2 hours or of professional development. In addition, as Christine said, if you have a teacher who does some data entry and does mostly teaching, all of their professional development can be focused on teaching. They don't have to carve out a little percent that's somehow data entry related. So I hope that provides a little bit of clarification. And when it comes to your budgets, you could budget all of their professional development time in the area that they would be doing that professional development. So for example, if you have a teacher who, spends a lot of time teaching, but does a little bit of student recruitment and data entry, you could, in your budget, you can put all of their PD time in 1691, because that's what they're doing their professional development in. Same with the case manager. A lot of case managers are split between 2122 and 2160. I think I got those function codes correct. But let's say the professional development that they are working on this year is really focused on supporting individuals to transition into post-secondary education and understanding post-secondary opportunities better. And that's what their time is going to be, their professional development is focused on. Then their hours would be in that 2122, even though they're also doing some work in 2160. The other thing that I want to stress is everyone who works in your program who needs PD has to have PD time budgeted in the state grant. We had some confusion where people said, oh, well, this person is only paid out of the federal grant, so they don't have to have PD. That is not the case, right? Your 064 grant provides services. And if you happen to have a person who is a part-time teacher or a full-time teacher, or, and you budget their instruction and prep time only on the federal grant, that's fine. But you do need to have professional development time budgeted for them in the state 064. Let's see, I'm looking at my notes here. Another thing, as the slide says, that 2% is a minimum. You may pay your staff for additional professional development time. So if you have a part-time teacher who, based on the 2%, only has to do 10 hours, but they choose, or you believe that it's important for them to participate in the PLCs and do a course, and they have the time to do it, and it turns out to be 20 hours of PD, that's fine. They're welcome to do 20 hours of PD, and you can pay them for 20 hours of PD. So that 2% is just a minimum. They're welcome to do more than that. Another group that can be kind of excluded from the PD requirement is maybe your higher level management staff. So some agencies, your executive director, if you're a community-based organization, might have some hours on your grant. You have human resources staff, you have your high-level fiscal staff, things like that. Or, if you're an agency that has a bookkeeper, your bookkeeper might be on it. So people whose roles are predominantly within that administrative, that 2300, also don't really have to do that 2%. Again, it would be nice if they understood adult ed somewhat, but they don't have to do the professional development.
Should we take questions,
Christine?
Amanda?
Yeah. Just trying to think if I hit all of my
I think you did.
ones. I did, yeah.
We have a comment in the chat from Josh at IU13 who'd like to hear from some of his colleagues if somebody's got a good internal PD tracking system. So hit Josh up if you have something to say to him. Do you have any questions about this for either me or Amanda before we move on? Okay, and you can always email your advisor.
And I do want to just, stress the idea of the professional learning communities being professional development, right? That may in fact be some of the most meaningful professional development for some of your staff, and that is most definitely professional development. And as Christine indicated, whatever time they spend doing it, as long as you have some kind of documentation for it, that's fine. Next slide, Christine.
Yes, please. So another set of questions on the evaluations that I noticed were about lesson plans. And the first question I got a couple times, and this is just one of the wordings, is the CCRS aligned lesson plan a quote unquote set in stone template? And the answer to that is no. It is an ideal that includes all of the elements of like an excellent lesson plan. So if your lesson plan covers multiple class meetings, it'll have more of those elements, right? If it's a 45-minute lesson plan, it may only include some of them. The thing that's, really required for all lesson plans would be, standards, right? You have to have standards aligned lessons. This is a non-negotiable thing. But, all of the other elements that are in that template are things that are, are good to have and nice to have, but obviously you probably couldn't fit them into a 45-minute lesson, and we understand that. So use that template if it's useful for you, or use your own if it's not, as long as you have standards and, objectives and things of that nature. And I will say the bottom line really is with 30% prep time, we should be seeing standards aligned lesson plans when we monitor. They may not be perfect, but they shouldn't be a simple agenda or an after the fact report of what happened in the lesson. There should be standards, objectives, and activities or tasks. So, at a minimum, that's what we should be seeing. Another question I got in the evaluations were, what are some opportunities for teachers to share and time to collaborate and write new lesson plans? And the PLCs are perfect time for that kind of activity. That's really what should be going on in your PLCs, and you should be budgeting time for that. And that's PD time. That shouldn't come out of your teacher's individual 30% prep time. The 30% prep time is for the individual teacher to have time for lesson preparation for their classes and other kinds of preparation for their classes. Do we have any questions about lesson planning? Okay. I would also ask if you're on this webinar today, I don't know who you are because this was all anonymous. I would really like the person who wrote the comment about that they think the direction of relying on standards is wrong and we should focus on, I think it was relentless standards was the phrase that was used in the comment, that we should focus more on making people good teachers. I would love an email from you. I would actually like to talk about that a little bit and your thoughts on that. So if the word relentless was used, if that was you, please email me. All right, we can go on, Amanda. Also, as part of the kickoff evaluations, we asked attendees what suggestions they had for future division webinars. So our upcoming webinars will kind of be structured similar to this one where, Amanda might give you some information, but then instead of, it all being division people talking, it will be those presentations like we had last year. And so based on your suggestions, October's topic will be becoming a data-driven organization. You know, how to get all your staff involved in using data to improve performance. November, we'll focus on retention, best practices and models, perhaps agency interventions to reduce dropouts or stopouts. And December will be partnerships, sort of learning more about the common elements of healthy partnerships, maybe improving partnerships with Title I. So if you, in the past, what we've done is the advisors have reached out to programs that we thought, you know, we knew were doing a good job in these areas. And I think that what we'd like now is for you to reach out to your advisor and saying, hey, I have something to say about this. You know, we want your colleagues to hear from your successes, to learn from your successes. So if you have any interest in either yourself or some of your staff presenting at a future webinar on one of these topics, you know, please get in touch with your advisor so that we can get that set up. And, you know, if not, we'll be picking you. We have a question in the chat. Can we invite one of our staff to a meeting relevant to them? Yes, absolutely. Do we have any questions about upcoming division webinars? Do we have anybody who wants to offer themselves up right now? Okay. One final ask for questions from the whole webinar. All right, well, if there are no questions, Amanda, is it okay to close it out?
Yep. Thank you all very much for your time.
The recording will be posted shortly.